Right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this morning's webinar with us here at equimedia. Titled Cake, Not Cookies, a step-by-step GA4 strategy for financial services. Obviously, the cookieless world and the cookieless future in GA4 are a massive subject. So I'm hoping to be able to give you some really good insight today on how to get ready for that. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard about GA4. Some of you may well have GA4 setups that already exist. But actually, what we're going to hope to take you through today is thinking beyond just GA4 and what it means in terms of wider marketing and other considerations for the future as well. So today should have something for everyone. Here's today's agenda. And to start with, you'll be glad to hear it's not going to be a full hour, which we have in the diary. It's going to be about 45 minutes. And the first half an hour really will focus on three things. The first one will be an intro to GA4, what it is, what it means, and how you can get some value out of it. We'll then quickly cover off what we consider an 8-step GA4 implementation roadmap and some of the key steps you need to take to ensure that you're at least setting those foundations for success. What we'll then jump into after that is that piece I was just saying, which is thinking beyond GA4. So especially for financial services, a lot of these will apply to other businesses too, but with specific examples for financial services businesses, what a 5-tier cake might look like. So not just thinking about those cookies, but actually the layers to create what's going to be a GA4 foundation that will set you up for success and future-proof your business. And then at the end, we'll jump into our analytics expert panel, and that's why today I've got with me Rob and Ricardo, who will introduce themselves shortly. And what you would have noticed on this first slide is a horrific cake-related pun. So, hey, GA4, we want a piece of meat. There will be some of that throughout. So some of you will love it, some of you might hate it. But fundamentally, we can have a bit of fun. And throughout this, there are some cake-related puns. And what we're going to do is do a bit of a competition. So if you can count all the relevant cake-related puns throughout and send us an email afterwards with how many you think there are, we're going to offer a free universal analytics audit to the first client that emails us, or first business that emails us, just to say, sorry, with the right number. So a little bit of fun, but if you're paying attention, you'll get some free value out of Rob and Ricardo and the rest of the expert team. So quickly to introduce myself, my name is Britton. I'm Chief Operating Officer at equimedia. I've been with the business for over 7 years now. Worked with some fantastic financial services businesses, implementing some great analytics setups and getting some real value and driving results. And that's really what we're here to do, is drive really great performance. I'm looking forward to taking you through this today. And I'll hand over to Rob and Ricardo, who will introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi, cheers, Ross. So I'm Rob, Web Analytics Manager here at equimedia. Been with equimedia for around 4 years. I head up the web analytics implementations, which revolve around the Google stack. It's included various financial services implementations over the year, involving funnel analysis. We use tools such as Google Analytics, Data Studio, Google Tag Manager, plus various CRO tools. Very much looking forward to sharing this webinar with you and answering your questions.
Hi guys, my name is Ricardo. I'm the Web Analytics Executive at equimedia. I've been at the company for about a year and a half, and yeah, I've worked on a lot of financial services GA4 implementations, and I've worked in financial services companies before, so I've got a fair understanding of how an analytics setup should be done for financial services, and yeah, I'm excited to go into a bit more detail today.
Great. So I know we've got some existing clients here today, and some other businesses that we haven't engaged with before. So a little bit about us. We're a full service digital marketing agency. We're fully independent, and we've been around for about 23 years. Our first client was a financial services brand, and we continued on that same trajectory throughout. So you can see all the different things we do. But we love working with financial services businesses. We love driving results, and we're lucky enough to have worked with some fantastic brands. First things first, universal analytics is dead, nearly. It will be soon. So GA's had a bit of a storied history since 2005. Some of you might have been around when Urchin was first launched in 2005, and a lot has changed since then. Obviously, on the 19th of March this year, Google announced that Universal Analytics will be dead as of July 2023. So basically a year from now. And it is really pretty vitally important, which is why we're doing this webinar today, that you get your Google Analytics 4 set up now. And that isn't really hyperbole. There's a lot of hyperbole that goes around these sort of things, but GA4 is a significant sea change in how online behavior and conversions are measured, and that can't really be overstated too much. So whereas Universal Analytics, Web and App, classic Google Analytics all works in a very similar fashion, GA4 really is a historic shift, and it's one that you need to get prepared for pretty quickly. So what do we know about GA4? Again, some of you will already know this kind of information, but I'll quickly run through what GA4 really means. And there are kind of these 8 key elements that make up make GA4 unique. So firstly, it combines data from all your different properties. So from web, app, websites, multi-platform tracking, that's really one of the key elements of GA4. So whereas cross-domain tracking and cross-device tracking has always been a little bit tricky, but always possible, this is going to make it much more seamless and much more consistent. And that level of consistent measurement has always been something that's been missing. That privacy-centric element of GA4, now with the cookieless world incoming, third-party cookies will die off. We don't know when, but we know it's coming soon. The July 2023 date from GA4, from Google, I should say, sorry, is an indication of maybe when some of those changes will come in, but nothing centered yet. But one of the positives about Google Analytics 4 is it's very much going to be privacy-centric. No more, detailed browsing information stored in the browser. It'll all be managed through first-party permissions. One of the positives about GA4 is you are going to be able to discover and activate insights much quicker, which we're going to come onto in more detail. And it will allow for better data-driven attribution. Attribution is something we really focus on here at Equimedia for all of our cross-channel strategies we run for businesses, especially for financial services businesses, understanding the impact programmatic might have on PPC conversions, or YouTube might have on the journey towards quote or sale or lead, whatever it might be. And as we prepare for the cookieless world, probably one of the more important elements of this is AI and machine learning, and that kind of machine learning predictive modeling that is likely to come in. And we're going to come onto that again a little bit later, but the predictive analytics and the predictive audiences element of Google Analytics 4 is going to be super important, and it's likely the way things will go as cookies are phased out, or third-party cookies phased out, I should say, and we focus more on first-party data. But fundamentally, one of the positive things about GA4, it is a sea change, it is a significant shift in how online behavior will be measured. And as I'll kind of get onto later, when you compare your current GA data with GA4 data, they will look very different. And that's going to be an internal business challenge, especially if you're currently using Google Analytics as a major reporting tool. But it is a much more flexible and accurate system. So that like-for-like comparison going forward after GA4 is implemented, you should have a lot more consistency in metrics. As I said, GA3 is completely different to GA4. And the main difference really is in the fact that it's all event-based data collection. And as you can see on the right-hand side in that table, which was produced by Google not long ago, there are lots of different hit types that were captured in existing GA3 or Universal Analytics. Everything going forward is going to be event-based. And for anybody that's done GA implementations in the past, you'll know that you can obviously set up custom events in Google Analytics currently, which is great. It really helps with producing additional data and additional insight. But going forward, everything will be event-based. So if you're comparing sessions with events, they are not going to be comparable. And we'll come on to that a little bit later as well. But what this really means is the fact that they are two completely different types of measurement means you need to get a very bare minimum of 6 months comparative data. And what we're suggesting for all clients is get Google Analytics 4 set up now, even if it's a basic implementation, get it set up immediately, because you want to start collecting data to compare. Because as I said, if you're using GA for current internal reporting purposes of any kind, you're going to have to deal with the questions of why is this down? Why is this look so different? These questions will pop up. So you need to have the comparative data, ideally over 12 months, so you can do some year-on-year comparison if you can. So that's really an important first point to raise, is get it up and running as soon as possible, because the event-based data collection isn't, you know, it's no joke. The other key thing that's changing with GA4 is, and anybody that has, especially for financial services businesses, you'll likely have very detailed funnel reports, very detailed funnel visualizations, so you can see progression if you've got a quote engine online, for example, between someone entering their details and entering other personal details, maybe get to the quote step and they get to the payment step, and you want to look at all the detail funnel exploration elements and funnel visualizations from current Google Analytics. That will change. There are no myriad of different reports in GA4. You have one place to go, and that is what used to be called, until recently, Analysis Hub, but has now been changed to Explorations by Google. It's quite a significant change, and we're going to talk a bit later about how to best get the best reporting out of Google Analytics 4. But fundamentally, exploration reports is really useful because it provides you a wide range of kind of advanced techniques that help you uncover much deeper insights about customer behavior. And it gives you a decent amount of flexibility. However, you know, there are other ways to get really good quality data out of GA4 as well. Whereas in Google Analytics 3, the Universal Analytics, you have some out-of-the-box reports. Everything will need to be customizable in GA4. So if you do have some specific GA reporting needs, it'll need to be built on a case-by-case basis. But again, one of the real benefits of GA4 is, whereas before you might be comparing non-comparable metrics like sessions and events, everything will be events-based. So again, comparable data will be much easier. So, as I said, exploration reports are great, but actually what you really want as a top priority is getting some Data Studio reports up and running. And I'm sure a majority of you are using Data Studio reports already. And if you're not, would strongly advise doing so. Here's an anonymized Data Studio report that we've recently produced it in just half a day. And this Data Studio is now a really flexible, really simple tool to make sure you're tracking goal completions, conversions, and any other metrics you want. We've even built some really complicated Data Studio dashboards that track sequential field progression. So you can actually see how people progress between the first field on a form to the last out of 20. So you can see that maybe field 8 of 20 is the one where you're causing 20% drop off. So that's a really good area of optimization. And these are the kind of insights you can get out of Google Analytics. Right now, it will be easier to get out of GA4. And really probably one of our key recommendations when you're thinking about Google Analytics 4 is, yes, you want to be capturing data now. Yes, the data won't be comparable necessarily to Universal Analytics. You can set up exploration reports in the new GA4 hub. You could talk for quite a long time. I'm not going to spend the time on this today about different reports you can set up in GA4. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with anybody about that. But actually, Data Studio is our recommended tool really to get the data out of GA4, out of Google Analytics generally, and create something completely bespoke. So if you're looking for regular reporting, Data Studio is the way to go. Great. Now, one of the things that's really important to understand is that things change all the time with Google Analytics. And as I mentioned before, Analysis Hub, which is a new reporting tool, was called Analysis Hub until very recently, and now it's changed to Explorations. And I'll just play this quick clip, 25 seconds from Donald Rumsfeld, which explains what we know about GA4 quite nicely.
Reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me, because as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
That's quite a famous clip of
reports that say that.
It's quite a famous clip of Donald Rumsfeld during the Iraq War, but basically it's just a way of saying there are things we know about GA4, and there's lots of things that are coming that we don't know about GA4, and it's really important to stay on top of them. But there are still quite a lot of unknowns, and we'll come on to that in a second. But that's why it's really important to be at the sharp end of the spear, so to speak, on what's happening with GA4, because things are changing all the time. One of the things you can do is actually links in the bottom right hand corner, but you'll be able to find it quite easily by Google. Is just look at GA features being rolled out monthly. There are new things being rolled out with GA4 all the time, and it's really important to stay on top of those. Some really cool features, some of which we'll come on to shortly, but one of the things we'd strongly recommend is being in contact with your current agency or internal team, and make sure that as and when these new features are rolled out, that you're making the most of them, and that you're also testing them, because we're going to have to make sure we're testing all of these new features as GA4 comes out. So when that crossover period comes on July of 2023, they are not left behind. And finally, kind of as part of this is the final slide in our introduction to GA4 section. And I appreciate you might have plenty of questions off the back of this. And at the end, as I mentioned, we're going to have a 15-minute Q&A where I'll kind of facilitate between Rob and Ricardo. So there is a question and answer within the webinar. So please do put any of your questions you've got around anything I've already said, anything that we will say as well within the next half an hour or so. Please do put them in the Q&A, and we can do our best to answer all of them at the end as well. So there are three distinct tiers of GA4 implementations that we do. This is the way we've really packaged them up, just to try and make, because GA4 is such a new thing, just to try and make it as clear for everyone as possible. So basic, standard, and enhanced. So if you're the kind of business where you have a simple brochureware site, you have basic lead capture, small website with 50 pages or less, you're going to need a basic implementation. And one of the things we'd recommend you do, and again, we'll come on to this with our 8-step GA4 implementation plan, is to make sure you do a detailed existing universal analytics audit so you can compare like for like. We're setting up with basic things like basic recommended event configuration, ensuring your Google Ads and or other Google marketing stack tools are integrated, including some training as well. And that's really our standard packages: an audit, setting up the recommended events, setting you up with a basic report, and also doing some training as well. The standard and enhanced are really there for financial services businesses and or e-commerce brands to use. So where you have more complex funnels, if you have a complex quote and buy engine or lead generation form, if you need a level of custom event tracking beyond that Google automatically operates in GA4, that's a really important thing you need. So if you have an established GA setup with a complex online transactional element, you are going to be looking at something, with a slightly higher level of complexity, that's for sure. And at the far end of the scale, if you're somebody that's got GA360 or a super large, well-established, high traffic volume website, you're going to want lots of custom events for different fields and different parts of the site to track behavior based on the click of a button to the transition to a page, and sequential field progression, and of course, any enhanced e-commerce elements as well. You're going to need a slightly more involved setup. And one thing we are doing is, if you've just started in your GA4 journey, let's say you've switched it on and you're collecting data, but you're not quite sure where to go next, or if you've got a fairly well-established GA4 setup and you've already had some work done, or even if you're just starting and this is the first you're hearing about GA4, we are offering some free 30-minute GA4 consultations to 2 businesses joining today's webinar. So please do get in contact with us if you'd like some advice. We'd be obviously more than happy to help. Great. So I hope that helped bring a bit of context, I guess, just at least at a high level to what GA4 really means, what it's going to mean for your business, and some of the steps you can take to get ready, at least as a starter for 10. So one of the things we'll move on to now, and it's just one slide which I'll talk through. And there is obviously much more detail that sits behind this, but we don't want it to be death by PowerPoint, as they say. So this is what we would consider an 8-step GA4 implementation roadmap. It's something we've been working on over the past 6 months or so since we've been doing more GA4 implementations to ensure that actually what you set up for GA4 is comparable to GA3. And that's probably one of the most important points to make when you're thinking about setting your GA4 profile up. And if you're not thinking about doing it within the next month, we would strongly advise doing so because you want that 12 months of comparable data. As I said, you don't want to be caught in a situation where someone's saying, why is this so far down? Or why is this so different to the way it used to be? You want to be able to look at that on a month-on-month basis and provide that reasoning and logic alongside that. So that comparative GA3 to GA4 element is really important, and that is part of this process. And first thing you've got to do is really define what your site is. What are your users' goals? What's the current GA3 structure? Why does it exist the way it does? What are the key sections? What are the key functions? And yeah, consider GA4 as an entirely separate entity, because it really is an entirely separate entity. And you need to use this as a jumping off point for your further development. So make sure you really sit down and think about, what is my GA3? What does my website do? Are we tracking the correct goals? Do we have the right events set up? If I could start again, which is what GA4 is, what would I ideally like? What would I ideally like to be able to track and report on? And use it as a blank slate, because as per point 2, you need to critique your current GA3 setup. And given that Universal Analytics has been around for many, many years now, we see this when we audit Google clients' GA3 accounts, is bloat is highly likely. You want to be reviewing your current data, reviewing your old reports. You may have some broken goals. You may have missing reporting. You may have things that haven't worked for ages. You just haven't gotten around to fixing. This is the opportunity to fix those problems. So even though it is a significant sea change, you've got to turn this into a really positive opportunity, which is to actually create a new GA4 setup that we know is going to have more accurate tracking, into something that's going to have much more benefit for you moving forward. And given that GA4 is event-based and event-based only, not hit-based, what you want to do is recreate the goals and events currently in GA3 as accurately as possible. It's never going to get it to be perfect, but if you've got 5 goals set up in your current Universal Analytics setup, you want those 5 goals to be replicated in GA4 so you can do a like-for-like comparison and see if there are any differences, especially when you're setting up more custom events around, say, form progression or scroll depth or whatever it might be. If you're looking at your CRO program from a financial services perspective, which I'm sure all of you are thinking about website conversion all the time, and your GA4 can be a really powerful tool to power your CRO going forward. And that's something, again, we'll come on to a little bit later. But getting your GA4 and your conversion goals set up and all your different events set up for that is really important. Step number 4 of 8 is all about data layers, and all of you are kind of within the financial services sector, especially if you've got quote and buy funnels or online transactional elements. I'm sure majority of you will have data layers already set up, and if you don't, we'd really strongly advise you doing so. It's going to be a very important part of your Google Analytics 4 setup moving forward. So why bother having a data layer? For those of you that know, you already know this, but data layers basically allow you to capture very detailed information within your Google Analytics 4, or within Universal Analytics right now, I should say, sorry. But you'll also be able to capture that information in GA4 and report in great detail. So you'll be able to see segmented reports by policy type, by quote value, by premium value, whatever it might be. If you want to look at how people are performing based on, if you're a pet insurer, what kind of pet they're choosing, for example, you could get down to a very detailed level of reporting within Google Analytics 4 without having to go to, say, the team that deal with the sales and deal with the leads and try and get that data out of them in an Excel spreadsheet in some way, shape or form. You can get that out of Google Analytics. And by getting a really detailed data layer in place and re-looking at your data layer, which you will need to do, you can get very detailed reporting insights out of Google Analytics 4 that will help you make faster decisions. Point number 5. So just to summarize, we've reviewed the site. We know what it's there for. We've critiqued the structure. We've critiqued our goals. We've reviewed the bloat and the issues that might exist. We've recreated the goals and the events as best we can for comparable metrics. We've worked out what additional data we can actually collect within our data layer that will allow us to report in much greater detail. And I've got an example of that later as well. And now we just need to look at our step-by-step conversion journeys. And as I mentioned earlier, you're obviously going to want to set up some conversion funnels within explorations, or what used to be the analysis hub in Google Analytics 4. And that's probably a very sensible idea, is to get those, especially from a financial services perspective, especially in insurance or loans, whatever it might be, where you're driving lots of different, collecting lots of bits of data within your funnel, for example. You want to be able to have those funnels within explorations, but also have them in Data Studio as well, most likely, so you can segment it at your fingertips too. But we'd really strongly recommend, especially in financial services businesses, and as I mentioned about conversion rate optimization, tracking your conversion funnel at a field by field basis. And that feels like it might be a lot of work. We've done this at quite a high level, complicated level for insurance businesses in the last 6 to 12 months, where we actually have 50 fields within a quote and buy funnel, and you can track sequential progression from field 1 to field 50. So you start off with 100% of people engaged with field 1, and you can see at field 5 or 6 or 7 and segment it by device or channel. And you can begin to see, oh, well, we've got a 20% drop off at the point where we're asking for postcode, or do we have an issue with our postcode finder? Do we have a validation problem on our email field, for example? Or are people getting to the policy information section of the quote and buy funnel and they're making a selection, but they're not progressing to the next one? Okay, do we not have enough policy information or reasons to buy within our quote and buy funnel? These are little insights, for example, that we've gotten out that have enabled us to A/B test different elements in the funnel to drive higher value. So think about your conversion funnels. Think about what insight you want to get from a strategic perspective to support other activity. That's really quite important. The sixth one is a slightly drier part of it, which is identify required classifications. But again, as these dry things tend to be, it's rather important. So one of the positive things about Google Analytics is it automatically creates the same classifications. So device, source, all the consistent metrics you'd expect. But custom event classes will be quite a big job to migrate. So if you've got lots of custom events set up in your current Universal Analytics setup, that's a manual migration process. And planning for that is really important, because it will be a big job. And as Rob and Ricardo and I have discussed and felt in the last 6 months or so, it takes a lot of time and effort to migrate those over and make sure that, again, they're consistent with GA3. There's a lot of due diligence to be done. So step 7, that due diligence of those 6 steps before, at least as a basic start of a 10, is really important to get done. But once that's done, get up and running ASAP. There are a lot of changes and things you want to understand in Google Analytics 4, as I said. But you want to be collecting data sooner rather than later to compare it to GA3. So that really is everything to be said to that step. Get moving at pace. Don't wait. If you wait, you'll probably regret it, because you may want to look back year on year. And if you only start setting your GA4 up in October of this year, there will be no year on year data to compare. So the sooner the better, fundamentally. And the final one is get prepared for the switchover, as I just mentioned. So our advice to clients at the moment is, you want to be using GA4 as your primary Google Analytics reporting tool by March 2023. GA3 is obviously going to be phased out by July. So if you have that 3-month grace period of getting used to not looking at GA3 data, that's probably quite a positive thing, because you can stop fixating on, say, you'll understand by March, assuming you get your GA4 up and running within the next 4 to 6 weeks, where the key discrepancies are going to be in terms of the difference in data. So yeah, get used to it, I think, really is the key thing, sooner rather than later. And use GA4 as soon as you feel comfortable doing so as your primary reporting tool. So I hope that was helpful as kind of an 8-step implementation plan. That's obviously a slimmed down summary of what quite complicated steps, depending on the complexity of your setup, of course, leading back to our basic standard and enhanced implementation. But again, if you've already done some of this, if you've already done a GA4 setup and you're thinking, oh, we didn't do that, or we didn't think about that, or if you're just getting started, this is a great place to start. Any advice required, obviously, just let us know. So moving on, as I said, we've kind of been through quite a lot already for GA4. We all know we need GA4. You know, you're either here because you have GA4 and you want to get more out of it, or maybe this is the first you've heard about GA4. But you know, we know as a group here on this webinar how important it is. It is part of a much bigger shift in the digital landscape. So although getting your reporting through GA4 is super important, and it can't be underestimated how important that really is, you can start using GA4 sooner rather than later to give you more of a competitive advantage. And these are 5 things that we're putting in our kind of cake not cookies structure here. Of it's not just about preparing for the cookieless world. It's about actually creating layers in your cake and creating layers in your business that allow you as financial services companies largely to use GA4 to put you ahead of the competition as much as possible. So that's where these 5 things are going to come in, and where you can set foundations for future proofing your business fundamentally. Excuse me. So the wider Google ecosystem, if I can say it. So there's Google Analytics 4 in the middle. There is more to consider than GA4 to set yourself up for success, and that is important to state. This is just a small selection of other things that integrate well with GA4. Some of them are more important than others, in our view. All of them will have their own place. But what we're going to do as part of this next session of thinking beyond GA4 are picking the 5 things that, as an agency that's worked with lots of financial services businesses, and we understand the various complexities of compliance and conversion and reporting and what you need from a marketing perspective to give you the best possible value, we're going to kind of give you a top 5 of, if you were to build from the bottom of your cake up to the top, what would be the strongest, what would be the best foundation, and what would be the things that the cherry on the top that you would really want to have. So some of you hopefully are familiar, as I said, with Data Studio, with Google Search Console, with cookie consent, with ad integrations, but we'll talk through some of this stuff now. And as I said, any questions, please do add those into the chat, and we'll deal with those at the end of the Q&A as well. So what's our 5-tier beyond GA4 cake? And as I said, the foundational part really of it is about, firstly, improving consent and opt-in rates. And I'll touch on why that's so important shortly. But in a world where first-party data is going to be everything, you need the strong foundation of more first-party data and a super optimized consent banner. And although that might sound a bit dry, it is really quite important, actually. So that's the first thing we'll talk about. Then about how to utilize Google Consent Mode, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. But basically, there's a way for users that actually don't consent to cookies. You can still capture some anonymized Google data for modeling and marketing and reporting. And that's actually a very powerful tool. Data layers, I mentioned earlier, we speak about this in slightly more detail, but whether you have a quote and buy funnel or a lead gen funnel, whatever it might be, you can capture high value data for segmentation and reporting. BigQuery, which again, hopefully some of you have heard of before. It's actually a rather big deal, BigQuery. GA4 only retains up to 14 months of historical data. You obviously want to retain more year-on-year historical data, and there's nothing to say that, and again, as Google do, as I said, there are lots of known unknowns and unknown unknowns. There is nothing stopping Google saying in 6 months' time that they will retain data up to 50 months. Who knows? But for the moment, what we know is, BigQuery is quite an important part of retaining historical data and being able to report on it. And then the first part, so that top part of the cake is, or the top tier, I should say, is once you've got that best practice setup done, use GA4's machine learning to actually boost retargeting as many of you will no doubt know, AI and machine learning marketing is going to be probably where the market goes once third-party cookies are retired. And again, there are lots of known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and that's kind of one of them. But the way that new beta tools and the way that Google's product strategy is going, that's likely the way that the world will go. So it's really important to start testing that kind of thing now, and we'll touch on that shortly. So if you don't, it's actually quite interesting because from a recent Deloitte study, none of the UK websites they researched actually allow the users to change cookie consent, and that as financial services brands with large compliance teams and a real focus on compliance and FCA regulation, you'd be surprised how many highly regulated businesses in financial services still don't have compliance solutions. And one of the things I'd really suggest you doing is have a chat with your analytics team, with your development team. It can sit in various different teams, but we always think it should sit with the analytics team because it's how cookies are triggered, or how tags are triggered, I should say, sorry. Make sure you have a really strong compliance solution. We partner with OneTrust, and we recommend OneTrust because it's a very simple to use tool. Nice high level of customization, but actually one of the important things about a tool like OneTrust is you can actually A/B test different cookie consent banners to get your opt-in rate up, and getting your opt-in rate up on your cookie consent banner is going to be of vital importance as we move into a first-party data world. And again, might not sound like the most exciting subject, but actually A/B testing cookie consent banners and getting your opt-in rates up is going to be, it can be a really powerful part of your marketing strategy moving forward, especially once we get to the tip of the cake, i.e. using the data out of GA4 in order to model marketing. And as I mentioned, with the third-party cookies being phased out, there's lots of data modeling, machine learning, and anonymized data collection options that exist. And it's actually quite an interesting time to do the webinar because we actually wrote a blog, which you can see at the bottom of the screen, that I say we, I'm not going to take credit for it, that was all Rob, but Rob wrote a blog about the UK government's recent data reform bill announcement that actually stated that cookie consent banners as we know them could become a thing of the past within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I think actually in California it already exists, whereby this system exists, or it may well be in, is it in existence already, Rob?
Yes, it is, yeah.
It is,
yeah. Global consent, yeah. Global
consent, which is the way that it's likely to go in the future, which is actually whenever you visit a website, you don't have to accept cookies. You only do it once within the browser, and after that, it passes those permissions to every website you visit. So those cookie consent banners by website may not exist in the future. Who knows? All we know is that collecting that first-party data in GA4 is going to be very important. So important part of the recipe, but that first foundational step. And as I mentioned, you want to always be A/B testing your opt-in rates to bring it up. And you can see at the top example there these are both OneTrust examples. A client whereby he implemented OneTrust and actually you didn't see a drop in opt-ins. We've seen a gradual uptick in opt-ins and session volumes over time, so that's good. And the option at the bottom was where consideration wasn't really given to the fact that when you change your opt-in banner, what might happen is that because you weren't collecting data in a very compliant way in the first place, actually your session data within Google Analytics drops quite significantly because you'd never planned for it to, you'd never planned for the data to be collected in a different way fundamentally. So when you see, so some of you that don't necessarily have compliance solutions right now, if you were to implement the compliance solution, or maybe you've experienced this before in the past, is you might see a drop off of 20% in session volume. The goal after that is to A/B test to bring those opt-in rates up and get people consenting as much as possible to your on-site cookies in a compliant fashion. So the next layer within our kind of top 5 tiers is Google consent mode. So the right-hand side graph explains it really well in terms of what Google consent mode is. So if you imagine you visit a site and you see the consent banner, and if you consent, then brilliant. Your data goes into GA4 and it's collected properly. If you don't consent currently, your Google, your session, your website session wouldn't be tracked in any Google Stack property. You wouldn't be able to track the conversions for your ads. That non-consenting option would be a problem. What Google Consent Mode does is it sits between your cookie consent solution and your reporting software. And if somebody doesn't consent, it actually passes the data through Google Consent Mode in a completely anonymized fashion. And the cookies aren't sent, but only non-personally identifiable information is sent by pings to your reporting tools, which means you can still report on your conversions for your ads, which again is obviously really important. And you're still capturing the data in GA4 for future modeling potentially. So it allows for the data modeling of non-consenting users based on their data. It's a highly compliant solution, and I strongly advise, especially if you're driving high volumes through the web, through websites, through PPC or whatever channels it might be, for an insurance product or a loan product, whatever it might be. They're a fairly essential layer to financial services businesses, especially in high traffic volume scenarios, to ensure you're measuring success and failure accurately, but also to make sure you're measuring those conversions more or most accurately as well. I mentioned a detailed data layer implementation as kind of a really important part of that layer. So you've captured all the data you can in GA4, brilliant. Actually, on the left-hand side, again, an anonymized version of a data layer, which again, in tech speak could be quite dry, but in reality, you turn it into something really meaningful. And if you can pass all this field by field data, policy by policy data into GA4, you can report a lot faster and be able to make much faster, smarter decisions. And in the world we live in, a matter of weeks to wait for a report on which policy types or which pet types or what loan type, loan values, different gender or age considerations that might be driving best or worst performance can help you make smarter decisions about your marketing activity. So really think about a detailed data layer implementation. It's really helped us working with financial services businesses make quick decisions that improve both conversion and marketing performance. So one that you need to put fairly high on your agenda for sure. So BigQuery linking. So BigQuery is probably one of the things that some people would have heard of, maybe don't know what it necessarily does, but it will be a core part of getting the most out of and future-proofing your Google Analytics 4 setup. So what is BigQuery? So if you imagine on the left-hand side, you've got data sources. You've got Google Analytics 4, you might have Excel spreadsheets, you can have other databases that sit with relevant information. And the BigQuery basically would sit in the middle, and it would take that data, and it would require an expert to write a script in BigQuery that then refines that data and passes it into your reporting tools. Which means that fundamentally it means if you've got messy data on the left, or if you have lots of data on the left, you're not quite sure how to translate into really pretty, easily segmentable reporting in, say, Data Studio. BigQuery would be the middle data warehousing place that you transpose that data into something meaningful and usable. And especially for financial services businesses, where you've got lots and lots of different complex data streams quite often. From a reporting perspective, you're thinking, we've got all these different data streams and I want to turn it into one thing that's meaningful. That's where BigQuery can be really powerful. And as I mentioned, GA4 only retains historical data from the past 14 months, really core point. Something you really need to keep in mind and keep an eye again on those new feature releases, because it could change. Not likely to at the moment based on what we've seen, but as highly regulated businesses, you want to be able to measure that year-on-year performance. 14 months isn't going to be enough, most likely, to do that. So you want to ensure you retain that historical data. And the way it works is, you on the left, you would capture the data in GA4. You would then pass it to BigQuery, a very simple way of explaining it, but you would basically pass the data to BigQuery. It's then stored in the Google Cloud. And some of you probably are familiar with the Google Cloud infrastructure, but the data can be stored for free. One of the good things about BigQuery is it has 10 gigabyte limits on monthly storage and 1 terabyte limits on query data processing. Again, we don't know whether those limits are good or not. 1 terabyte is a lot, so I think it's not going to be an issue. If you have large amounts of data, it may be an issue, but fundamentally, if you are only capturing data from the last 14 months, there would be automated processes that would pull the data out of GA4, pass it into Google Cloud, and then you would then have all that data, historical data, available in Data Studio. So getting that Google into BigQuery and getting data into into BigQuery and in the Google Cloud will be important for making sure you've got those historical reports accessible in Data Studio or whatever reporting tool you're currently using. One of the key things to note actually is if you're a GA4, currently a GA360 user, GA4 will retain it for 50 months. So again, an indication that maybe things will change, but who knows. The last one, which is actually quite important, is one of the things that Google automatically does is it creates what it calls predictive audiences. So this is the tip of the spear, really, which is you're collecting all of this great anonymized first-party data in GA4, and you've built this solid base, you've built layers of protection on top of it, you've added that reporting power through data layers. Actually, what are you going to do with that data other than report on it, obviously? And that's where GA4 has quite a huge difference. It has these AI and machine learning predictive audiences, and on the left-hand side, you can see where, for a particular client, it's now collected enough data to actually start using 7-day churning users. So what GA4 would do is it would say, who are your 7-day churning users? So active users who are likely not to visit your property in the next 7 days, but we know have visited previously. You could pass the data and what we know about that audience of people who have taken that action through to Google Ads. And you can actually start retargeting and remarketing with AI machine learning based audiences out of GA4. Still in its infancy, obviously. You can do this with DV360 and Search Ads 360. But as I said, this is likely where things are going to go. And one of the key indications of that is, and as many of you will know, is about Google Performance Max. So smart bidding within Google Ads is soon to be replaced by Performance Max. It's just quite a significant change. And Performance Max is a bit of a black box. But again, it uses AI, machine learning algorithms to do marketing. So if this is the first time you've heard of Performance Max, we've got a blog on it, check it out. And yeah, let us know if you have any questions or thoughts on it. But as I said, if we're talking about what our financial services beyond GA4 layer cake looks like, these would be the 5 key things that we would suggest focusing on to start with. It's certainly not an exhaustive list. There's lots of other things to think about. You obviously, as I said, want to take that 8-step approach at the very start and make sure your GA4 implementation is set up as best practice from the very start. But then beyond that, make sure you're taking all of these kind of 5 core steps that we would recommend to set yourself up for future success and hopefully give you a competitive advantage in the future as well. Great. So I hope that was useful. We're now going to move on to a few questions. Any more, please do put them in the chat, put them in the question and answer in the question and answer section. But let's start off. Rob, Ricardo, that's obviously a lot of me talking through this stuff, which we've worked on together. I think one of the key things I want to hear from you guys is, as the people on the ground doing the work, is, as GA4 has obviously stripped back a lot of its pre-built reports. I think that's one of the things I've certainly taken from it, is it strips back a lot of those pre-built reports. But if I'm a business and I'm looking at this, should I be thinking about Data Studio? Should I be thinking about exploration reports, or a mixture between the two? What do you think is the best approach?
If I take that, I think it's a bit of both, really. So the exploration reports have quite a lot of functionalities that deal with the funnel analysis, which are really straightforward to use, and you can access through the GA4 interface. But Data Studio can give you more of a sort of top level analysis that you could easily get in GA3 just by finding the reports. But now, because GA4 is so stripped down, it's kind of gone away. So yeah, I'd say use the exploration reports more for the funnel analysis, and
yeah.
And then Data Studio for sort of top level reporting on what's going on.
I think your Data Studio is probably more for your business reporting, isn't it? It's like, what's performance, what's general performance been like, and are there any key top level insights we need? But actually, if there are any watch outs or maybe some performance dips that you can see in Data Studio, you want a pre-built exploration report to allow you to dive into that detail, don't you?
Yeah, that's it, exactly. Yeah.
And there's obviously another question that was submitted in advance of this was, there seems to be a push towards the usage of other auxiliary Google products such as server-side GTM and BigQuery. And obviously a question is always, how much should companies budget for that, which is obviously a big deal. Do you have any idea in terms of budgets?
Do you want to take this one, Ricardo? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the server-side GTM, it's about £40 per server instance. The recommendation is to have 3 servers in order to track your websites. So be about £120 per month for the server side implementation. In terms of BigQuery, BigQuery is mostly free, really. So as you mentioned earlier, there's the 1 terabyte of querying limit and 10 gigabyte of data collection limit. Larger sites might need a little bit more, but even so, the additional cost of data collection is quite slim. So it'll be around about 2 pence per gigabyte for data collection, and then £6 for an additional terabyte of querying data. So it's for the tool that you get, I think it's worth the cost, even if you're going to exceed it a little bit.
Yeah, it's pretty reasonable, isn't it? Especially for small to medium-sized sites. Obviously, for larger traffic sites, cost can be slightly larger. But as Ricardo said, there are ways to reduce those monthly data usage costs.
Yeah. And a question that's just been submitted probably for you, Rob, is does the introduction of GA4 mean that all attribution modeling for conversion reporting will be data-driven, or will we still be able to see last non-direct click, last click, first click, etc.?
Yeah, you can switch between the various models. Data-driven is the default for GA4, but you certainly can switch between the different models. And I would expect there to be some more developments on that front coming up very shortly.
That's one more of the known unknowns, isn't it? That it's just trying to navigate that. And yeah, there's obviously, as I mentioned a few times, and we've just seen this already, which is it's going to be very difficult to achieve. This is another question actually as well, which is it's going to be very difficult to achieve absolute parity, isn't it, between your existing GA3 reports and your existing GA4 reports as well. I mean, how close do you think we're going to get? And in terms of attribution reporting, do you think that will impact the parity between attribution reporting as well?
There being different data models, so not all metrics and dimensions will be directly translated, but as we are seeing, Google's still updating some of GA4's functionalities. We've recently seen bounce rate, UTM's been updated recently, some conversion rates improvements. This is all functionality you'll see very, very soon coming into GA4. Along with some other things you were more familiar with in GA3, such as the views. And now there's like a roll-up property for the GA4 360 version, which kind of emulates that to some degree. So what I would say is, whereas you wouldn't currently have direct sort of parity or absolute parity, there's certainly a move towards being able to achieve that.
And last question, Rob, or Ricardo, I should say, sorry, before we end. For one of the questions submitted beforehand was, I haven't started yet. How quickly can I get on GA4, basically? Yeah.
Ricardo, do you want to take this one? Sorry, I've seen you started talking.
You're on mute, Ricardo. We nearly got to the end without a mute.
They got a double in the end. In terms of getting set up, at a basic level, it can be done very quickly. If you're already using Google Tag Manager to set up your Universal Analytics account, you can very easily just set up a GA4 tag and start collecting data on just like page level data. But once it comes to the event level data, which gets a bit more complicated, then you'll need to spend a bit more time in the setup.
Yeah. It's quite an important point, isn't it? Because actually turning GA4 on it doesn't take very long at all, does it? You're just collecting the data, but actually the important part of collecting the data is making it meaningful. So you can start collecting data today probably, but actually you want all the relevant events and goals and things set up so you can do that GA3 versus GA4 how close is the data analysis really. And also I think it's about making sure that, you know, GA3 has been around for a long time now. We'll all have quirks in our setups or things we don't quite understand or things that aren't quite right. So actually let's make GA4 gold standard, and let's make sure that all of the frustrations we have with our current universal analytics setup are addressed in the new one, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's right.
Brilliant. Okay, well that takes us to 11:58. I said it'd be 45 minutes, but obviously we had a lot more to cover than we expected. So I hope you all got value from that. Thank you for joining, and I hope all of the cake related puns weren't too cringy. But if you have spotted the number of relevant puns you've had, please do just email us as a bit of fun, and we're more than happy to do kind of a free universal analytics setup, a free universal analytics audit, I should say. Sorry. Yeah, so thanks for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and hopefully speak soon.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Goodbye.